The enemy. That means the Army private who turned over thousands of classified documents to Wikileaks could spend the rest of his life behind bars with no chance of parole. RT's Liz Wall has been following the case.
It is the most serious charge that the private first class faces. So that means he still faces the possibility of life without parole. Now, the court took a look at the testimony and evidence we've heard so far throughout this case and found that there is enough evidence to move forward with this charge of aiding the enemy. The prosecution has cited Manning's job as an intelligence analyst. They say that as an intelligence analyst, he should have known that by leaking these documents to the anti-secrecy website Wikileaks, that Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and Al-Qaeda affiliates were going to see this information. Now, the defense has insisted and has maintained that Bradley Manning in no way intended to aid the enemy. They say that he's a whistleblower and that he leaked these documents in an effort to expose wrongdoing, to spark a public debate of what is going on in the wars abroad and diplomatically really what the truth is. Right now, trial is wrapping up. Just a matter of time now before we will hear closing arguments, and ultimately it will be one person, the judge in this case, that will deliver the verdict.
And Bradley Manning is now the only whistleblower feeling the pressure from the U.S. government. The latest is, of course, former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, who blew the lid on America's secret surveillance activities and is currently stranded in the transit zone of a Moscow airport. And as RT's Ganej Chikan now reports, the two cases are part of a wider movement for transparency that it may be impossible for Washington to stop.
The U.S. government's relentless crackdown on whistleblowers is sort of designed to scare the whistleblowers of the future. But we see that Bradley Manning's fate has not scared Edward Snowden, for example. So despite the crackdown, whistleblowers keep coming forward with revelations about the government's wrongdoings as they see them. So the U.S. government decided that punishment is perhaps not enough. In the wake of Bradley Manning's leaks, the government came up with the so-called insider threat program, under which government employees with clearances are basically instructed to snitch on each other. So employees have to judge their colleagues' speech and behavior and determine whether they might become a whistleblower. You can imagine how many baseless and discriminatory investigations the program could trigger. Critics argue that the Obama administration is using McCarthy methods to go after whistleblowers. On top of that, you have journalists whose sources in the government have dried up. The Justice Department has shown that to track down an unauthorized source, they can secretly seize journalists' communications records, as was the case with AP journalists. So about this new era of whistleblowers, we spoke with Denver Nix, who's been writing extensively on the Bradley Manning case. Take a listen.
You know, for Daniel Ellsberg to leak the Pentagon Papers, he had to walk out of the Rand Corporation with a box full of documents, hole up in a hotel room for like 72 hours, and run thousands of pages of documents off on a photocopier. Bradley Manning had to burn them to a disk drive and upload them to a computer. Snowden, presumably did something similar. It's just a lot easier to leak documents, and we live in an era of unprecedented secrecy and unprecedented openness. These two forces are bound to collide.
It's interesting. Polls show that the majority of Americans think of Edward Snowden as a whistleblower, not a traitor, whereas the majority of Americans think Bradley Manning is a traitor. To a certain extent, the public support for this or that whistleblower depends on the subject of their revelations. Bradley Manning revealed the U.S. government's war crimes abroad. Perhaps not surprisingly, Manning generates more sympathy abroad than at home. But one can argue that Americans are more sympathetic to Snowden because his revelations are about their rights, their civil liberties. So they care more. When it's some Iraqi's rights, they apparently care less.
The European Union has cut off funding to disputed Israeli-occupied territories in the West Bank and